One interesting dynamic that we see in this economy right now is the wealth effect, which is basically the situation where a lot of people see their home equity up right now, they see their stock portfolio up, and it gives them the confidence to go out and continue spending more money than they otherwise would just because their asset portfolios are doing well right now. But it doesn't actually mean that they're doing well. It just means that their assets are doing well. So the difference is that in order to realize any of those actual gains on this money, they would need to sell their stocks or sell their real estate or something in order to realize that cash. Because after all, the only other way to get access to that is to borrow against it. Well, right now, the total sum of all stocks in the US, the value, is about $51 trillion, okay? 6 years ago, it was only $32 trillion. The real problem that I see with this sort of behavior is just because your assets are doing well doesn't mean that you can go out and spend more than you make, guys. Like, some people fall into this trap where, like, okay, my house value is going up, my portfolio is going up, and you know, that means I can just maybe borrow a little bit more. Because if something goes wrong, I'll just sell some more stocks, or I will just take some home equity out of my home, you know, and pull a home equity line of credit. Things like that that people end up doing in order to access this money. But what you're really doing is you're spending money that you don't have, because the only way you really have the money is if you sell the asset. Now the money's yours. But if not, the asset is being borrowed against and it's now leverage for the bank. But the opposite of the wealth effect is also true when people's home value is plummeting, when their stock portfolio is going down. People tend to spend less money because they're not feeling as good about things. So a lot of this is really just psychological. Now, sometimes this can translate into real money, because in the first quarter of 2024, Americans earned about $11 trillion in interest payments and dividends, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is the most ever. So if you have enough money invested or saved in cash and you're earning interest on it, or you have enough dividends being thrown back from your stock portfolio, then it might not be an imaginary wealth effect. It might be real, that you really are collecting more money right now. And they say it's estimated that when someone's net worth goes up like that, for every dollar their net worth goes up, you can expect that person will spend anywhere between 2 to 30 cents of that extra dollar that net worth is going up by. And they say that the wealth effect could be one of the reasons that inflation got so high during the pandemic, because think about it, all that money was invested into real estate, into the stock market, and made people richer on paper, and therefore push them to go out and spend more money, which in turn leads to higher inflation. And what could be happening right now is we might be dodging this so-called recession, at least on paper, with the GDP figures and the spending figures and unemployment figures, because of the wealth effect, because so many people are out there spending money that they kind of don't really have, but if they feel like they have it until they don't, right? You know, if your house value starts to go down and your portfolio starts to go down, then that spending will probably end. And we've already seen a big cutback on consumer spending in general lately, but it could get a lot worse if things continue on the path that we're on right now. And some people are trying to realize some of those gains right now, because we have seen housing inventory tick up in 90% of the metros across the United States right now. So almost everywhere, the inventory is higher than it was a year ago. It hasn't been enough yet to make prices go down in any meaningful way in most markets, but it is giving buyers more choices at this point and more leverage, which is always a good thing. But there are some pockets, like even some places here in Florida and some places in Texas, that are already above or at pre-pandemic levels of inventory. And that's why you're starting to see prices come down in those areas. And we can actually confirm this by looking at the ReVenture app. Now, some people like to argue this and say, oh, inventory is not up where I live. Well, if you live in an area that is red on this map, that means that the inventory has been growing year over year. And that's almost the entire country. Very few pockets of blue here, as you can see, which tells you that inventory is higher today than it was 1 year ago. And in 14% of the markets across the country right now, we have supply levels of real estate at or above pre-pandemic levels, guys. So it is starting to bounce back. Obviously not everywhere, only 14% of places, but you know, a year or two ago was nowhere. So that's how you have to look at this. It's a slow change, but eventually the inventory will probably rebound just about everywhere. And some people are gonna need to take advantage of that massive gain in equity that they had, especially if they feel the wealth effect and they're spending too much money that they don't have. Eventually, they may end up needing to sell that house in order to pay off some of these bills that they're racking up right now. I know the Northeast has the biggest supply challenges right now in the entire country, and that's where you're seeing the prices still go up the most by. That's where you're seeing the fewest homes for sale. Hartford, Connecticut right now has one of the lowest levels of inventory when compared to their pre-pandemic levels. And it's funny because this story has just yet another statistic, guys, that shows you that this economy is not nearly as strong as they keep telling us, and it's all coming back to housing affordability, all right? The average US home value has increased 50% since 2020 all the way until now. But incomes during this time only went up 18%. So that is not enough to keep up with these levels of increases. And that's just one thing that people need to pay for, just housing, okay? Not even considering food, your car, and insurance, and utilities, everything else that people have to pay for. It's very obvious that the wages have not been keeping up with inflation like they keep telling us it is. I don't know if anybody can tell, but I came over to St. Augustine today, and I'm doing a video here in the old part of town, and it's beautiful over here, guys. They got a lot of old houses, and they have lots of old big trees too to help me keep a little bit cool until I get out of Florida. And here's another thing that we can look at from the past, okay? A lot of people like to compare today's era with the 1970s inflation that we saw, because inflation was worse during this time frame. There's no doubt about that. But check out this, guys. During this time, from 1975 to 1979, home prices rose 66%. So pretty comparable with what happened today. Okay, but back then, the wages also grew by 40%. So more than double than they have grown recently to keep up with the rising cost of living. And back then, they didn't have a housing crash. Why? Because people could continue paying the higher prices, which today is not the case. So the low inventory is only gonna work for so long to keep the home prices high, but eventually it's gonna come to a point where if things keep going more expensive, right, in these low inventory markets, it'll get to a point where no one there can afford a house anymore. Maybe somebody moving in from a more wealthy area, but none of the locals. And when that point comes, and then more people decide to sell at some point in the future, that's when you're gonna see issues with prices, because there'll be no buyers left at those prices. So I just wanna mention that because a lot of people use this low inventory argument of why home prices will never come down, but low inventory will not be the case forever. And when it finally isn't anymore and home prices have gotten too expensive, that's when things are going to have to come back down to reality where people can purchase it. But you know, they got to keep coming up with all sorts of different things to try to get people in to buy right now, because things are slow in the real estate industry. We've seen, you know, the sales levels go down to numbers we haven't seen since like the 1970s, guys. It's really bad right now. You know, and you can look around your neighborhood and say, oh, everything that comes up for sale flies off the market, but that's not the case everywhere. And even though that happens, it gives you the perception that the market is hot, but that's likely happening because you're in a low inventory area. So anytime a decent listing does hit the market, of course it's going to fly off the market when there's a lot of people who want to buy that house.
That's the church.
I did this tour once back when I first came to St. Augustine. I highly recommend it, guys. Not paid promotion or anything, but if you're ever in the area, do the tram tour, because they give you all kinds of local history, lots of cool stuff to see around here. So the latest gimmick, I will call it, that the housing industry has come up with recently is they just named June as the National Homeownership Month, as if June doesn't already have enough things associated with it right now. But now it has to be National Homeownership Month as well, because they're trying to get people juiced up to go out and buy houses that they can't afford, guys, because otherwise more and more real estate agents, more and more mortgage lenders are going to continue going out of business, so they're trying to save themselves. Who can blame them? But the thing is, they're using the same old tactics and the same old sayings to try to get people in that just aren't really going to work because people can't afford it. Take a look at this. So the typical thing they always tell people is a homeowner's average net worth in 2022 was about $396,000 versus a renter at only $10,400. So it's 38 times higher, okay? But one thing they probably don't tell you in that figure is probably the average homeowner is 55 years or older right now. And that's why they have this net worth, because of all their home equity they built up, as well as their 401ks and retirement accounts and everything like that. You know, how can you compare a renter who's 21 and is renting and has a $10,000 net worth to somebody who's 55 and has a $400,000 net worth? It's not even comparable. But they're using that as a statistic to get you juiced up about buying, because they're making it sound like if you buy and you become a homeowner, that's going to make you rich overnight. Even President Biden is in on this too, because he also made a proclamation recognizing June as the National Homeownership Month. He says that homeownership is a sign of economic strength, and that owning a home is about more than putting a roof over your family's head. It's about the American dream, okay? The American dream is dead, guys, just so you know, unless you're rich right now. He says that for generations, it's been a pathway to the middle class, an opportunity to build community and to pass down wealth to your children. But too many Americans today still struggle to buy a home. This National Homeownership Month, we recommit to giving every American a fair shot at that dream. Well, you know they're definitely doing that, because they're coming out with every single program imaginable to get people to sign on the dotted line right now, and it's still not working. That's the crazy thing. We're in a situation right now where we have 0% down mortgages available to low income and to first-time home buyers, guys. Forever, you could always get an FHA loan, a VA loan if you're a veteran. You could get an USDA loan, all 3% down maximum for these loans, and that's been around forever. But on top of that, there's all these home buyer credits that the government will give you. You know, here in Florida, we have the Hometown Heroes program, giving people up to, like, I forgot what it was, like almost $40,000 in some cases to go out there and buy a house. Like, there are so many credits available to people right now to get out there and buy, and it's still not enough to juice this housing market, guys. It is still abysmally low when it comes to the sales figures right now. Like, things are so bad with real estate right now, we literally are at 1970s levels of US home sales, guys. In 1978, there was 4.09 million US existing home sales, okay? In April of 2024, we have 4.14 million. Here's the big difference. It's not just that houses are a lot more expensive now, it's also the fact that there's so many more people living in this country than there was then. In 1978, the population of the US was 223 million. Today, it's 341 million, and it's still not enough to juice this housing market. I mean, that just goes to show you how bad this is and how big of trouble our economy's in. So when I see numbers like this, as a real estate veteran, someone that's spent a lot of time in this business, you can't fool me, okay? I'm not gonna think and agree with people that say that home prices are here to stay and they're just gonna remain high forever, guys. It might remain high for a few more years. Like, I know that me and others have talked about a housing crash, and we're all kind of surprised it hasn't happened by now, but you have to remember the sheer amount of money that was pumped into the market. You have to think about the wealth effect that we talked about earlier that has had a massive influence on people's spending habits and the ability for people to take credit any which way possible. You know, a personal loan, buy now, pay later, home equity loans, home equity lines of credit, credit cards. There's so many different ways people get access to money right now that they just don't have. And all of that has a massive impact on the artificial spending that our economy can do right now. Got Flagler College over here. Looks like they're doing a re-roof. And the only other reason I believe that real estate is holding its value so well is because a lot of people think of real estate as a hedge against inflation. And it is, because the more money that's printed and the more inflation goes up, then usually the higher home prices go, because a lot of people will buy real estate rather than hang on to cash, because that will continue to appreciate in value, whereas cash loses its value. Makes sense. But my thinking is that, you know, a handful of people in the world that have money can't be the ones purchasing all the real estate. At least I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll stand corrected on that in the future if BlackRock and Blackstone come in and buy everything like people think is going to happen. We'll see, huh? But in general, people are just looking for ways to, you know, save their money right now and not lose it to inflation. You know, look at China, guys. Check out this graph right now. You know, you see the price in gold skyrocketing here because China, especially citizens of China, are some of the biggest buyers of gold worldwide right now, because they understand that gold is more valuable than any fiat currency you can ever give someone. At the same time, the Chinese are dumping US treasuries like no tomorrow. You can see the red line is the treasuries, and they're just letting them all go because they realize that that's not even that valuable either, because you're being repaid in dollars that are continuing to lose value. So more and more Chinese are just saying, you know what, we're just gonna hold on to gold from now on. But I'm of the mindset that no matter how rich you look on paper, no matter how much that wealth effect is influencing your decision to spend, I think that's when it's wise to save even more, guys, to keep building up that nest egg, so that way when things really are bad for you, you have that money and there's nothing to worry about. You know, that's what I did for so many years, because I was just so worried about going broke. After being broke for a while, I never wanted to be broke again. And so seeing the value of my condo rise or the value of my savings rise doesn't influence me to spend more. I'm just going to continue doing what I normally do, and that's it. You know, if my income goes up a lot, that's a different thing. But just seeing your money on paper go up in value as a reason to spend more, I think is very foolish right now. But people are going to do it because it's a psychological trick that people just fall for. There's that old saying, when the tide goes out, we'll see who's been swimming naked, right? So we'll be finding out sooner than later. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.